Hi, I'm George Dahl. Welcome back to my film journal. Happy Halloween, and what better way to celebrate the season than with a movie by John Carpenter, one of the horror greats and one of my personal favorite directors. Today, we're talking about his 1980 effort, The Fog, his immediate follow-up to the smash hit Halloween that put him on the map.
Antonio Bay has a curse on it. We're all cursed.
So with his follow-up movie, rather than repeat the gory and visceral thrills of Halloween, which would have been a surefire bet, instead, Carpenter sort of challenges himself to see if he could tell a moody and atmospheric ghost story. A story about a small seaside town that's plagued by a horde of zombified 19th century seamen who emerge out of a mysterious bank of fog. The Fog was the first in a two-picture deal that Carpenter made with Avco Embassy Pictures, the second being Escape from New York. Avco was an independent production and distribution company that had taken a 5-year hiatus from producing films after the company suffered an $8 million loss in 1973. The company appointed a new president in 1977, a guy named Robert Ream, who abandoned production on the expensive star-studded prestige dramas that the company was known for. They had their biggest hit with The Graduate in 1968, and decided instead to cash in on the new trend for horror films, bankrolling cheap indies from up-and-coming independent horror directors, like with David Cronenberg's Scanners, Joe Dante's The Howling, and Don Coscarelli's Phantasm. And of course, obviously, they would want to sign the hottest director of the bunch, Mr. John Carpenter. And though the budget was set at $1 million, which was $600,000 more than Carpenter had to work with on Halloween, the introduction of the optical special effects work needed to create a believable sentient fog swallowed up a good majority of the budget. So Carpenter and his producer Deborah Hill approached the movie in a similar way they did Halloween. One of the things that I've always appreciated about John Carpenter and the way he makes his movies is the sense that there was a sort of team spirit or family dynamic on set that carried over from film to film. Like his contemporary George Romero, who, refused to go to Hollywood. He would only make movies in his adoptive hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and only with the crew of his Carnegie Mellon Film School friends. Carpenter also cast his movies with a lot of recurring faces, and he staffed them with a loyal coterie of filmmakers. Dean Cundey, cinematographer on Halloween 1 through 3, Escape from New York, and The Thing, returns to photograph this movie. Tommy Lee Wallace, jack of all trades and fellow USC graduate, had worked with Carpenter since their film school short-turned-feature, Dark Star. He also served as editor on both Halloween and The Fog, and most famously, he later went on to direct the 1991 television miniseries of Stephen King's It. Nick Castle was back too. He'd been friends with Carpenter since college, and while working as a production assistant on Halloween, actually played Michael Myers in the movie. And to their eternal credit, the team behind the new Halloween reboot series actually brought him back to play the Shape in 2018's Halloween and this year's Halloween Kills. Castle worked on The Fog to put out fires and aid in the production. And like Wallace, he also played a variety of the ghosts in the movie, and even gets a character named after him. Tom Atkins' leading role of Nick Castle, and George Buck Flowers' character of the doomed sailor is named after Wallace. Castle would go on to a successful career in Hollywood as well, directing films like The Last Starfighter. Makeup maestro Rob Bottin makes his Carpenter debut here, and his manic devotion to his craft would culminate in his legendary effects work on The Thing in 1982. He also got to play the vengeful Captain Blake in the film's climactic scene. I've always really gravitated towards the idea of a prolific filmmaker who approaches his productions with almost a sort of theater troupe mentality, reusing the same actors in all sorts of different parts over different films to show off their range. And when you're on a shoestring, it's great to have a loyal bunch of people who can hop in and fill a lot of various different roles, as obviously Tommy Lee Wallace and Nick Castle did on these movies. And in a way, maybe to my detriment, I've approached filmmaking in a similar way. To me, the idea of hiring too many outside people to achieve a vision, it seems kind of mercenary to me. And I think it's more fun when you're doing it with your friends. When the film was originally released in 1980, critics complained that it lacked the suspense, shock, and drive of Halloween. A critique that persists to this day is that the characters in the film are rather bland and for the most part kind of aimless.
There's another thing here too. I think Carpenter was depending upon the same kind of craft that he had in Halloween to make the movie work. He doesn't bother to really establish the characters in his town as people. One of the things that was interesting, for example, about Jaws, and to a degree to Halloween, was that we really got to know the people enough to care about them, but we don't care about these people in The Fog.
So we get boring characters killed off in boring ways.
Yeah, it's if you're looking for another movie like Halloween, this is not the movie to go see.
Exactly.
The Fog is basically an ensemble piece, but if the movie does have a main character, then it's Adrienne Barbeau's Stevie Wayne, the local late-night radio DJ. She has the most screen time, and unifies the movie by connecting all the disparate narrative strands via her broadcast, without actually sharing any scenes with the other actors.
Please, my son is trapped. 887 White Beach Lane. Someone get to 887 White Beach Lane.
For a lot of the cast, the movie was a family affair. Carpenter and Barbeau were newlyweds, Nancy Loomis was married to Tommy Lee Wallace, and Janet Leigh and Jamie Lee Curtis were mother and daughter. It's fun to see Jamie Lee Curtis back in a John Carpenter movie.
I think I'll go to Vancouver now.
This time playing more of a free spirit, and less nebbish than she was in the original Halloween, or in any of the Canadian slasher films that had occupied most of her time after her breakout role, films like Terror Train and Prom Night, where she essentially just plays the Laurie Strode role again as people are murdered around her. I love her look in this movie too. Bright colors, she's much more fashionable, especially when compared to the drab outfits she's constantly given when playing the virginal scream queen in distress. And she agreed to be in the movie on the condition from Carpenter that she could play a more cosmopolitan and independent spirit. A hitchhiker, a burgeoning painter who's down to party, getting a lift from Tom Atkins and hooking up with him later. Tom Atkins is a non-traditionally handsome movie star with a sort of lopsided face, though he would grow into his looks as older authority figures in films like The Night of the Creeps. But here he exudes a sense of masculinity and strength. He kind of occupies the Stu Redman role from Stephen King's The Stand, the blue-collar townie who, while ordinary on paper, is the type of person you'd want around in a crisis. Veteran actor Hal Holbrook plays Father Malone, the Van Helsing figure in the film. And by that, I mean he's a wise old sage who has a nuanced understanding of the spirit world and a mortal who ultimately possesses the supernatural knowledge needed to defeat the ghostly enemy. According to Carpenter, Holbrook really didn't like the completed movie when he saw it, but he acquits himself admirably in it. And the movie could have used more of him, as he pops up in only 3 scenes.
Jesus.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Williams.
The role was originally supposed to go to Christopher Lee, who turned down the similar part of Dr. Loomis in Halloween, but he had to pass on The Fog due to a scheduling conflict. Lee, a veteran of Hammer horror known best for playing Dracula, was robbed too often of opportunities to play the hero. When he does, in films like The Devil Rides Out, he's incredibly effective and memorable. Holbrook, though, while lacking the regality that Lee would have brought to the part, instead plays Father Malone as a sort of cool working-class priest, with big feather-cut 70s hair. He's presiding over a sort of hole-in-the-wall parish that we see doesn't even have the funds to pay John Carpenter's janitor character.
Father, can I get paid?
Why don't you come in at 6 instead of 4 tomorrow?
Yes, sir.
He enjoys a little nightcap of wine while reading in his study, and then begins to unravel the mystery of the town curse, finding that his grandfather, one of the founders, conspired to undermine the establishment of a leper colony by leading their ship to crash on the rocks. To make matters worse, the townspeople even stole their chest of gold after they drowned at sea. Upon learning this information, Father Malone becomes rather despondent, refusing to give the invocation at the upcoming 100-year anniversary celebration of Antonio Bay. Unlike Janet Leigh's character of the bustling town coordinator and her hapless assistant Nancy Loomis, who look upon the revelation as something more trivial, as ancient history, Malone appears to have more of a connection to the idea of the town and what it purports to represent. Janet Leigh's overbearing interest is entirely superficial. She wants the town to have a nice party to show off a new statue, a statue that, while ostensibly honoring the history and legacy of the town, is really just a vehicle to signal its current economic growth. Malone is the only character in the movie who we're told explicitly shares a lineage with the town founders. His conception of Antonio Bay is more pure and holistic. The idea of a town celebration is anathema to him if the town is the product of treachery.
Our celebration tonight is a travesty. We're honoring murderers.
And as far as the town is concerned, what we see of it, it's a fairly robust little community, where people can go to the store and meet their basic needs. The homes are all comfortable and well kept. There seem to be enough jobs in the fishing industry, and the streets are empty of nocturnal crime or danger. And the townsfolk appear to enjoy a functioning monoculture. Everyone tunes into the same radio station. A good amount of them show up for a town celebration. But from what we see from our sample of working men, it's common for them to drift out to sea and drink all night.
You drank a lot of beer last night.
Yeah, every night.
What's it like?
It's always the same. Room starts spinning.
I mean fishing.
Which implies they are rather unmoored and aimless, and it's hinted at that their domestic situations are all less than fulfilling.
I thought you were happily married.
Not that happy.
Even the two meteorologists grouse about the routine boredom of their work.
Yeah, I thought you were off tonight.
I love my job.
And if the church, which we're told is the oldest building in town, is short on funds and falling into disrepair, that seems to imply a lack of parishioners willing to attend or give money. Instead of supporting what would be a community pillar like the church, the political types in town sink money and time into aesthetic projects like statues. The town of Antonio Bay could be read as an allegory for the American economy in the 20th century, a project on autopilot, pursuing continuous growth for growth's sake, without a real driving purpose. It's replete with monuments to its own greatness that seek to indicate the idea of prosperity, while papering over the fact that its citizens are increasingly detached from their families, work, and history.
Another 5 or 10 minutes, everyone will have seen the statue.
The townspeople eventually have to face the reality of their own founding in the form of the fog and the vengeful spirits it carries with it. With a story like this, it's fairly tempting to want to point to America's history of slavery or its crimes against indigenous peoples, and fairly easy to read the film as an allegory for those concerns. Though, just in the interest of nuance and for my adding a new opinion to the conversation, Carpenter gave a pretty interesting quote in an interview with Fangoria magazine from 1980, right before the film was released. A lot of American history, and gloriously, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, is due to the fact that we were these crazy outlaws, thieves, pirates. There's a lot of corruption in America, and glorious corruption. Back in the old days, we had a pretty wild beginning. I like that quote a lot. I think it's kind of fun and interesting. And it lends credence to an idea of mine that maybe The Fog is less about America wrangling with its exploitative past, though that is there, and the movie is more of a lament by Carpenter for the loss of its pirates, thieves, and gangsters. That the American people, and we see it in the citizens of Antonio Bay, have become complacent, bored, and unable to recognize danger around them. That a country founded by, let's call them morally questionable men of action, for lack of a better term, can only operate for so long under the veneer of domesticity and the imposition of consumerism and routine before it eventually buckles under its own weight. It has to confront the country's schizophrenic nature. That a place founded by cowboys and gangsters, the sad truth is that it's atrophied into a world where people simply get up, go to work, and then drink themselves into a stupor. Carpenter films often feature a naive populace who have been lulled into a false sense of security by the quotidian operation of everyday life, blind to the threats in their midst, like the sheriff in Haddonfield in Halloween who placates Loomis's crusade against Michael Myers but basically thinks he's a kook. Or the citizens in They Live who don't realize that they're secretly being ruled by malevolent aliens who keep them docile by tricking them into pursuing lives of vapid materialism. In both The Fog and They Live, Assault on Precinct 13, Big Trouble in Little China, and even The Thing, blue-collar workers or average guys become heroes who realize the potential of their birthright and unlock the bravery and gumption normally suppressed and rendered unnecessary by polite society, in order to face an insurmountable threat. However, it's possible that my theory on the film's theme is incomplete, as it's made fairly concrete by the movie that the only way to atone for the crimes of the past and to nullify the threat of the ghosts is to pay reparations, in the form of 6 victims, and the return of the stolen gold. And by the end, it is clear that the best way to put this terror to rest is to give the ghosts what they want. No amount of fortification or defense will save you. The Fog has been sometimes impugned as a dull, plodding affair that's light on scares and that lacks a sense of focus. And when I first saw it, coming off the highs of viscerally terrifying films like The Thing, I was a little let down. It's not until I rewatched it recently, after a gap of many years, that I began to appreciate it a little bit more and to understand what Carpenter was going for. In the intervening time, I had become more familiar with the Gothic horror films of Val Lewton after watching Martin Scorsese's documentary A Personal Journey Through American Movies, where he recommends Lewton's work highly. Lewton produced a litany of horror films in the 1940s that, due to constraints on budget, had to achieve the majority of their scares through mood, production design, and atmosphere. And I really enjoyed watching films like Cat People, The Body Snatcher, and I Walked with a Zombie. So when I read that The Fog was Carpenter's attempt at homage to Lewton's films, I was like, okay, I get it, that makes a lot of sense now. If I had to guess, it seems like Carpenter conceived of The Fog as a little bit of a challenge to himself. Can I make a spooky movie that achieves its horror and scares without resorting to a lot of blood and guts? And from what we know about the production history, it sounds like he, as he admits, kind of failed. After a screening of the film's initial cut, which Carpenter describes as a disaster, the team went back and shot more sequences of gore and violence to amp up the movie's effect. Scenes like this, where one of the sailors has a tool jabbed into his eye, or Charles Cypher's more explicit death scene, which was originally meant to happen off-screen and be heard over the phone. These were added in reshoots. So just as a side note, Charles Cypher's character is also named after a Carpenter collaborator, Alien screenwriter Dan O'Bannon. And when I saw that roll by in the credits, I thought that was kind of odd, because if I'm not wrong, in the late 70s, Carpenter and O'Bannon, they sort of experienced a bit of a falling out. After O'Bannon went around town, I guess feeling jilted, or that Carpenter had stolen a lot of the spotlight, and went around telling people that Carpenter really didn't direct Dark Star. I helped. He really co-directed it. I helped a lot. Which led to them sort of having a face-to-face at the premiere for Halloween, where O'Bannon told Carpenter he hated the movie and thought that it sucked, and they really didn't talk very much after that. So maybe Charles Cypher's character, a guy who is consistently making unsuccessful romantic passes at Adrienne Barbeau, Carpenter's real-world wife, and then is killed horribly, is maybe less of an ode to O'Bannon and more of a jab. I don't know, kind of funny. As far as the more moody and less explicit scares are concerned, I think some of them really work. This scene where a piece of the old ship found washed ashore by Adrienne Barbeau's young son becomes spontaneously flushed with seawater and reveals an ominous warning is really pretty effective. The fog effect is also pretty cool, really eerie and beautiful when we see it in wide shots coming off the water. I like that the fog rolls in and sort of consumes the town. It operates a lot like the menace in the original Blob film from 1958, an unstoppable force that swallows up everything. You can really only run away from it because it will inevitably catch up to you. Not even Grandma's safe. I think it's great that for the most part the ghosts are kept out of sight and deliberately vague, because when we see them at the end, they look really cool, and the staging of them in the church is really effective. Atmospherically and from a production design standpoint, I really like hanging out in this movie. I love the series of shots of the town at night, and Adrienne Barbeau's perch inside the lighthouse where she works as a late-night radio DJ playing smoky old jazz music is an incredibly romantic idea. Who wouldn't want that job? So I mentioned earlier in the review that John Carpenter is one of my favorite directors of all time. So I thought it was kind of weird when I was looking back through my YouTube page that I'd only ever really talked about one of his movies, Escape from L.A., which is not a great sample of his work. But you know what? His movies are so popular, and I didn't think I'd have anything really new to bring to the conversation. They've been talked about to death. But after rewatching The Fog, I felt that maybe I could bring something, an analysis, a critique that would be interesting and new and different, and I hope that you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed rewatching The Fog and revisiting this movie. I hope you guys have a really happy Halloween. Thanks so much again for tuning into my film journal. Check your candy for razor blades like the kid from Halloween 2. And can't wait to see you next time. Thanks.